Hey class, Professor Z here, and today I want to talk about photography basics. So right here, this is on the website, so I navigate here, here's our main page, and on the left here, if I just click on photography without doing the drop down, I get to this page of photography basics. And I'm going to go through this, you can refer to it at any time, but we're going to go over difference between different camera styles, what makes them tick on the inside, different lens types, shutter speed, aperture, and things like that, which are then going to lead into your assignments in the photography section. So when we talk about photography cameras, we have two main types of photography cameras that are on the market today. One that's been around a little bit longer, and one that's more taking over more and more uh, as they develop. On the left here, we have a representation of what is called a DSLR camera, or a digital single lens reflex camera. What that means is there's actually a physical mirror in there that has to move out of the way. The shutter opens, it exposes to the sensor, shutter closes, the mirror flips back down, but there are physical moving parts inside of it. On the right is our mirrorless camera, which is what is becoming more and more prevalent on the market and what we have more and more of actually within the university. And this is a actually physically smaller body type and has less or no moving parts depending on which model it is. And depending on your perspective, may or may not produce a better image. Some of that is subjective, but with the technology, we are able to produce better images with simpler lenses and things like that. So let's scroll down a little bit and kind of look at this. For anyone that's on campus, these are cameras that you can sign up for the equipment room. So we have on the top left here the Lumix FZ2500. On the right is the Lumix FZ300. On the bottom left is the Canon RP, which is the newer cameras that we have in stock, and we also have a DSLR camera, which is the Canon 80D. So the first three are all mirrorless. The last one is a DSLR. And here is, if you sign out on the FZ300s, I did create a tutorial on the FZ300 and the camera kit that we have. So when we look at the difference between an SLR or DSLR versus a mirrorless camera, right on the left side here we have that SLR technology from the side, so that way you can kind of see what it looks like on the inside. On the left here is our lens where the light passes through, and you can see this has a lot of elements inside the lens. So all those different blue curved lines, that's a different piece of glass inside of the lens. And the more elements it goes through, the more distortion I can get and the less sharp that image might be. And before we have a picture taken, we see that there is this angled blue line. That is the mirror that then reflects that image up into what we call the pentamirror or pentaprism, and then puts that out through the optical viewfinder. So when you look in the viewfinder here, you're looking down through the lens right there. And then when you take that picture, this blue mirror flips up out of the way, exposing the light to the green sensor in here. Obviously the sensor is not really green, just color coded inside here. Now, one thing to look at on the bottom here is this thing called flange distance. That's the distance between the back of the lens to the front of the sensor. And it's approximately 40 millimeters on this example here. Now when we look to the right here, you can see there's a lot less going on physically. The body can be smaller of the camera. In the lens, we have less physical elements, so there's less things for the light to go through and be altered before it hits that image sensor. And it's just hitting that sensor. What we see in our viewfinder up top or on the screen behind here is the same thing that the sensor sees. The advantages of that is that when we put a setting on our camera to alter the exposure or the color, we can see that instantly. We get instant feedback before we even take the picture to make sure it's looking the way we want it. Now we also notice the flange distance is a much shorter. That allows for sharper images. There are two main types of lenses. Now some cameras, like if I go back up here, right, we actually have these top two. These lenses are called super zooms because they're part of the camera. You can't change them out, so they're not interchangeable lenses. And They can zoom in and out. It has a mechanical motor inside there that make it go forward or backwards so you can get closer or further away from your subject. They're really good for a compact camera. You get a lot of range with them. You're not going to get the sharpness and quality that you'll get with interchangeable lenses, but for what they are really great lenses. Versus these down here are interchangeable lenses, so you can change these lenses on the camera depending on what your needs are. The lens that comes with the Canon RP that we have is a 24 to 105 millimeter lens, which is a very good focal range for, say, event photography. If you want to do sports or something like that, you need something in the 300 to 600 range in order to be able to see far out onto the field. Now, there's also two types of lenses of interchangeables. One is a prime lens and one is a zoom lens. So on the left here, we have a prime lens. You can see this is an example of an 85 millimeter Canon lens, and 85 millimeter is about the focal distance you want to be for representing the correct proportions of a person, so, or of any object. So if you're doing photo headshots of somebody, you really want to use something in that 85 millimeter range. You can be a little less, a little more, between 70 and 90-ish, and you'll get really accurate representation. If you start going wider, going 50 millimeters, 25 millimeters, 18 millimeters, you start getting distortion, you start widening out that image. And if you go to 200 or even more, you're going to start narrowing the figure when you're at a certain range. Prime lenses are really good also because there are less elements inside of it. You get a sharper image. So if sharpness is one of the key elements of what you're looking for when you in the future are going out and buying lenses, that might be something to consider. Versus a zoom lens like we have on the right here. So the 2470 that we have on the right is kind of a workhorse of a lens for a lot of event people because it's a great focal range. You can go wide out at 24, which gives you a nice group shot. You can also zoom into 70, which is almost close to that perfect focal distance for portrait shots. So you have a lot of range with this one lens. If you're in a controlled environment, you can always control the distance you are from your subject. Having a prime lens is really nice. So if you're in the studio doing portrait work, or you're out with a client and you can control that distance at all times, that might be a lens you would choose. If you're in an unpredictable environment where things are constantly moving, you need to be able to zoom in, zoom out really fast, but you can't change where you are, a zoom lens might be a really good option. And then, of course, there's a lot of photographers that have both of these in their camera bags so they can swap between them as they go, or actually have maybe two different cameras, one with one lens on it, one with another lens on it, so they can just switch camera bodies that already have the appropriate lens on it for what they need to do. Now let's start talking about some camera settings. And these are not necessarily in the order that you need to set them up. They're just in the order that I think about them in. And when I do think about my camera settings, I always think about what I want to achieve first and set that setting first and then adjust everything else around it. Because as you're going to see, if you change the shutter speed, you need to change the aperture as well, or change the ISO. Like all three of these are a combination together. It's not one independent of the other. They all will impact each other in a different way. So the aperture, when we talk about the aperture, that is the opening in the camera lens that allows the light to pass through it. So we can make that opening wider, make it smaller, and that does different things. We're going to see what that is in a moment. Shutter speed, that is how long we allow the shutter to remain open to expose the sensor to light. So how long are we going to take that image for? Is it going to be 1/1000th of a second, or is it going to be a second long? And that's going to have different results. ISO is a holdover term from the analog days of film, but it's essentially boosting the sensitivity of your sensor using the camera technology within it. And then white balance is, we have to match our color temperature based on the environment we're in, because every light source that we see has a different color temperature to it. We need to make sure we tell our camera what color temperature it is that we are in when we change settings. So let's start with talking about the aperture. Here's a great little chart that explains a lot about it, right? That top line there, this top line starting with the big wide open aperture on the left here, going all the way to the little one on the right there, that is showing a wide open aperture to a very closed aperture. So when we have a wide aperture, it's letting a lot of light in. So when we let a lot of light in, we're going to have a brighter image. The more light you let in, the brighter your image is going to be, the more exposure it's going to get. Versus if you close the aperture, you're going to have less light coming in. It's going to be a darker image. So that is one way you control the exposure of your image, how much light you're letting in by how open that aperture is. Now we represent and talk about our aperture in f-stops, which is essentially a measure of light. So an f-stop is a measure of amount of light. And we look at this first one where it's wide open is f2.8. So I like to think about, I think the easiest way to explain it is like we're still blocking, because it's not fully wide open, we're blocking about 2.8 stops of light from coming into the camera. Then as we start closing it down, we're letting less light in. So now we're blocking 4 stops of light, 5.6 stops of light. Now, the other thing that happens when you change this aperture setting is something called depth of field. You can see that represented on the bottom here. So this depth of field, what does that mean? That's talking about how much is going to be in focus when you take that picture. So you have a very shallow depth of field and you focus on a subject, the things before that and after that are going to start to get blurry. And the further away they are from that center part, the blurrier they will become. Versus if you have a small aperture like this one on the right, you're going to have a much greater depth of field, which means more things are going to be in focus, not just the little center object that you focused on. So if we look at this illustration right here, it kind of shows that example. So in our top right, we have a very shallow or narrow depth of field. This photographer over here is very bravely focusing on this bear in the middle of the field here. Now this is probably about f2.8 or f3.6 that they are using, and you can see they're focused right here. You can see a little bit before that area and a little bit after that area are still in focus. But then once you get before that becomes blurry, after that becomes blurry. Now it's not going to be as drastic as this right away. It's going to be more gradual. So the further things away are, the more blurry they're going to be. Versus the illustration below, where we have a much larger depth of field. We're focused on the same point, and the distance is the same. So those have stayed equal, but we've changed the aperture setting to something like f20 or f22, where now we can not only see the bear, we see the tree in front of the bear, we also see the trees behind the bear, and we see the mountain way in the background. When I think about what I want to use these for, if I want to take a scenic photo of a landscape, a mountain range, the trees in the distance, whatever, I want to close my aperture as much as possible and let as many things be in focus. If I want to control exactly what my viewer is going to look at, and I'm just trying to focus on a person's face or a flower or a bird or something, I want to have a shallow depth of field and let everything else blur out. So that way I can control what I want the audience to look at. So here's an example of what that might look like. On our left here, we have a very shallow depth of field. We're at f2. On the right, we're at f22. You can see wide open aperture here, closed down aperture here. When we have a wide open aperture, this little monkey hanging on the fence in focus, and that fence is out of focus, and the further the fence gets away, the blurrier it gets. Versus f22 here, the entire fence is in focus, except for the way in the back. You know, not everything's going to always remain in focus. Eventually it'll get blurry, but we have a lot more things in focus. And you can see how that changes what that picture is. This one on the left really draws your attention to the face of that monkey, versus the one on the right, you can, as an audience or as a viewer, you can jar it around wherever you want to look, and you're not really directed in any one direction except for the composition of it, what to look at. So that's one setting on our camera, it's our aperture. And that's going to control, again, aperture is going to control our exposure, so how bright or dark the image is, and our depth of field, so how in focus or out of focus the entire scene is going to be. The next thing is shutter speed. Shutter speed is how long we leave the shutter open, or how long we allow the sensor to be exposed to light to make that image. The faster the shutter speed, the less light information will hit the sensor. So if we take a really fast shutter picture inside, we might get a really dark image because there's not a lot of light. And if we take a very slow shutter, like 1 second or 8 seconds even, we'll get a lot of light and it'll get a brighter image. So based on where we are, what we're doing is how we determine what we want to do. If I'm outside and I'm doing sports photography, I'm going to want to have a fast shutter speed, 1/500, 1/1000. I can freeze the action as it's happening. So that's great for freezing the action. I can hone in on somebody, take that picture, and freeze the action. But again, that's something that only works when I'm outside with a lot of natural light. If I were to do that inside, I would need a lot of artificial light in order to maintain that same exposure level with a fast shutter speed. Now, of course, we can always bring flashes into it, but that also is limited to how much we can do as far as shutter speed, because most flashes have to sync with our camera, and they max out at about 1/250th of a second. Now, as we slow down our shutter speed, our movement is going to get blurred. So if we have a moving object in front of us and we have a slow shutter speed, that image will start to blur. Now, sometimes this could be beneficial. If we're trying to show a car in movement, we want a little bit of motion blur to show that it's actually moving. Because if we just take a picture of a car with a really fast shutter speed, it just looks like a car that's parked on the road because there's nothing to show that's moving. We need that little bit of blur to show that there's motion. The other thing is when we start slowing down our shutter speed, if we're hand holding it, just the vibration of our hands is going to cause blurriness as well, because our hands are not steady, and even the act of pushing that shutter is going to cause a problem. Here's an example of shutter speed. You can get the effect of the same thing, different effects, right? On the left here, we're at 1/2000th of a second. So we've done things to make sure it's exposed properly, but look at the sparks coming off the grinder. The sparks, we're freezing them in midair. We can see them, we can count them. It looks cool. We can also see the detail of the metal that's being cut and the gloves of the worker that's holding the grinder. Versus on the right here, we've slowed down our shutter speed to 1/8 of a second, and those sparks are now lines. We've lost the detail. The hands are no longer part of the subject. What the subject are those spark lines, those sparks flying through the air and creating lines through our image, because now we're allowing the exposure to be open longer. Now let's talk about ISO for a moment. The term is held over from the analog days. Film came with an ISO rating of how low light you could use with that particular film type. Now we use ISO to artificially boost the brightness of our images inside our camera. So even outside, I'll use ISO to boost the brightness sometimes based on if I'm in the shade of a tree or not. If I'm out under the bright sun, I usually don't have to boost my ISO. It would be at the lowest setting possible on my camera. But I could walk into a room that looks well lit, but I'm still going to be at ISO like 800 just to make sure I'm properly exposed. The downside to ISO, and it's hard to see on here, you might be able to see it on your it on your computer if you look at the website. The higher you go with ISO, once you get past 1600, you get to 3200 and 6400. Depending on the quality of your camera, so more expensive cameras are better at this because they have better technology in them, you will start to get graininess. If I were to take a image at a higher ISO and it didn't have a really good camera, I'm going to get pixelation. I'm going to get grain. So you have to really be conscious of how high you want to push your ISO versus figuring out how else to light your subject. Do you really need to put it that high? Do you have no other choice? What's your situation? Now, as I said before, all three of those things work together in tangent. So you have to think about the aperture, the shutter speed, and ISO all have the ability to make your image brighter or darker. I always try to think of what's my goal here. If my goal is to have a really shallow depth of field, because I'm trying to just do a portrait session and I just want to look at the person's face, I'll set my aperture first and then set my shutter speed maybe, and then my ISO, or maybe my ISO then shutter speed. but I always set my priority setting first. So if the depth of field is my priority, I'm going to set my aperture first. If I'm doing sports and capturing the action, freeze framing is my priority, I'll set my shutter speed first. Every single light source is going to have a color temperature. We measure color temperature in the Kelvin scale. Your direct sunlight is around 5200 Kelvin, as you see right here in the middle. As you go to flash or cloudy, it gets a little hotter. Our indoor incandescent bulbs are around 3000, or 3600 is what a lot of camera presets are for those. If you take an incandescent white balance of an outdoor image, you're going to get a blue image just because of how it works. You know, if you do a standard fluorescent, look, it's a little purple. Direct sunlight looks, we're in dark sunlight, so that looks exactly what it should look like. Flash is starting to get a little orange. Same with the cloudy. Shade gets more orange. If we were to do this inside with these settings, it would be exactly the opposite, based on what kind of light we have in there. So wherever you are, this might be your first thing you do. Set your white balance. If I'm inside, I need to set it for an indoor white balance. All your cameras are going to have these presets for them. I can manually tell my cameras what color temperature to be at. So if I'm using multiple cameras, I might do that to make sure they're all the same. But if I'm doing photography, usually I use one of the presets, and it's a really good way to go. Using your automatic white balance is not recommended because even within the same room or being outside in the same area, your color temperature can vary greatly from one location to another. Then when you go to edit afterwards, you're going to have white balances all over the place and they're going to be inconsistent. You want to try to keep your photos consistent by setting your white balance per location, so that way they're all the same color temperature as you're editing them. Now on any camera past the consumer version, and even inside your app on your iPhone or free apps that you can download, you can actually change a lot of these settings, by the way. So you can change your aperture setting on your iPhone if you dig into the settings a little bit, or download one of the free apps, which I have linked on one of the other pages here. So on the dial on top of the camera, you have different modes you can select. Yes, there's these fancy ones with icons. I ignore all that stuff. I ignore the green auto and just look at the P, A, S, or M options. So you have a program option, which is kind of like the auto for pros. It does do a lot of things for you, but you still get some control over it. The A, or the AV, is the aperture priority. Aperture priority allows you to set the aperture setting on your camera, and then the camera is going to take care of the shutter speed for you. So if you're in a setting that's changing a little bit and you know you want to keep your consistent aperture, you can choose that one and allow your camera to adjust your shutter speed to maintain proper exposure. And the opposite of that is your shutter priority, where you set your shutter speed and then it'll adjust the aperture setting for you to maintain that proper exposure. Then you have full manual mode, which is just that. You're constantly telling exactly what you want your shutter speed and your aperture and your ISO to be at all times. So that way you're in complete control of your camera. And I promise you, once you start using one of these modes, if someone gives you a regular point and shoot camera, you're going to be a little confused on how to use it because you're so used to using something that gives you control over your images. When you look through your camera viewfinder, you're going to see something similar to this. Based on what brand it is, it's going to be in a little different layout. But essentially, you're going to have on your screen here, where you're looking at the image, you're going to have different little focus areas that'll show it where it's focusing. And again, with camera models, you can adjust, is it going to try to focus everywhere? Can you pinpoint that focus? Is it doing face detection? A lot of cameras have a lot of different options these days, and I use different ones based on what circumstance I'm in, what setting I'm in, and what I'm trying to accomplish. On the bottom of your screen, or maybe on the top or on the sides, you're going to have always represented your shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO, and your exposure meter. So on the left here, you can see it says 125. That means 1/125th of a second. That's how fast the shutter speed is. We're at aperture f8. On the right, we're at ISO 200. In the middle here, this is our exposure meter. So in the middle, that means we're properly exposed. It's looking at the screen, it's doing an evaluative process and saying, hey, we're good. If it goes +1, that's, you're overexposed by an f-stop, or maybe overexposed by 2 f-stops. Same thing going the other direction, you're underexposed. And so you might have to adjust accordingly. Now, if you're within I always say if I'm within 1 to 1, I'm pretty good. I like to stay a little above the middle for a lot of my photos. When I do weddings, I really like to be slightly overexposed because I think it looks a little bit better. You also have to be conscious though, because if you have, say, the sun in the background, it's going to throw this exposure off a lot. So you have to be a little careful to trust this or not. Always trust and verify, trust your settings, take that test picture and then look at it and know from that test picture if you're overexposed or not. And one last thing about photography on these cameras is talking about file types. With this class, whether you're using your phone because you're taking this class remotely, or you're using one of the cameras from the equipment room because you're on campus, we can take photos in JPEG for this class because we're not going to be doing a lot of post-processing, and it saves a lot of room, and you can also upload them immediately to your Weebly website. However, if photography is something that you want to do and really get into it, you should start taking photos in a RAW format. Now, a lot of cameras will let you do RAW and JPEG at the same time, so you have that option, or you can do one or the other. Thing is, if you do RAW, you're definitely going to have to convert it before you upload it to the website. What RAW is an uncompressed photo of your image that has a lot more detail than what the compressed JPEG format does. So you can see in this image, the RAW one just has a lot more detail in the trees. There's a lot more color variation, light variation. And when you're editing in post-production, you have a lot more freedom to do things. You can correct the white balance. So, if the white balance is messed up, I can just go through and say, hey, these should all be at this color temperature. And it changes all that. So you have a lot more freedom and ability to edit in post-production with a RAW format. It is a larger file type though, so it will take up a lot of space. So if you don't have a large memory card or a large hard drive to save it all, it does become a problem after a while. So again, for this class, we can save it to JPEG, and that's going to do you just fine for this introduction class. But as you advance and you start doing more photography, you should definitely consider and convert to using RAW for all your camera settings. And that's it for the photography basics video. Next, you're going to start working on your photography projects, your photography alphabet, your depth of field, and your shutter speed. So go ahead and look at those assignments and start working on them. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me.